Last year I betrayed my childhood best friend, and slept with her husband a week after their wedding. Cassie and I had been best friends ever since grade school. We both attended the same schools growing up, and she lived 2 blocks away from me. We were both an only child, so I really considered her to be my sister. While we were close, Cassie and I were very different. She was the shy and quiet one, while I was loud and confident. In addition to be different personality-wise, we also were different in appearance. Cassie was 5 feet 10 inches with shoulder-length blonde hair and blue eyes. She was always an athlete in both high school and college, so she stayed in really good shape. She had long legs, small chest and a small ass. I was 5 feet 3 inches with long black hair and brown eyes. I was petite and stayed in shape by running a few times a week. I never really had a steady boyfriend while growing up and could never really settle on one. I liked to play the field and have fun. Cassie, on the other hand, only did relationships. I was always friends with her boyfriends, but they weren't really my type. Just after college, Cassie met Brian. He seemed to be a perfect match for Cassie. While Cassie was tall, Brian towered over her at 6 feet 5 inches. Like her, he was into sports during school and kept in shape after graduating. Being her best friend, naturally I had become good friends with Brian. On occasion, there were times I felt like Brian would look at me a little too long, but he was always a perfect gentleman towards me, and most importantly, he made Cassie very happy. I really felt like they were a perfect couple and was so happy for her. Brian and Cassie had already purchased a home that they were in the process of renovating when they tied the knot. They had a 10-day trip planned to Hawaii for their honeymoon, but because Cassie had recently been promoted at work, it would need to wait a couple weeks after their wedding, and she needed to attend a week-long conference in Chicago. I knew that they had a lot to do at their new home. Brian had shared with me that he planned to finish their master bedroom completely while Cassie was away as a little surprise for when she returned home. I had offered to help Brian to help clean and paint, as I thought Cassie would absolutely love coming back to her bedroom at least being complete. Brian let me know his dad was going to help him during the week, but if I had time Saturday to help finishing up, it would be appreciated, as Cassie would be home on Sunday. When Saturday came, I texted Brian that I had some running around to do but would be there around 1 p.m. I took a run and ran my errands and then came home to shower and get ready. It was around 12:15 and I lived about 20 minutes from them and found myself incredibly horny. I decided if I was quick enough I could get myself off before showering and heading over there. Being single, I had a few friends with benefits I'd see from time to time. I was only playing for about 5 minutes when my phone started to ring. I picked up my phone. It was Brian. I answered and he asked if I had left yet. I told him that I hadn't and was just about to shower and come over. He then asked I'd mind stopping at the grocery store quick to pick up paper towels and large garbage bags. I asked if he wanted anything else, like some food or alcohol. He said he planned on ordering us a pizza later, but that he wouldn't mind some beer if I had some. He said he'd pay me for everything when I came by. I hung up, but now I needed to make a stop before going there, so I figured I could play when I get home. As I was showering, it occurred to me that Brian and I never really were alone together, at least for more than maybe 5 minutes. I didn't really think much of it because I figured we'd be too busy doing our own thing anyway. I dried off and then tried to figure out what to wear. I realized the only pants I had that I wouldn't mind getting ruined were an old pair of jeans, but I didn't think I'd be too comfortable in those. I opted for a pair of black leggings. I tossed on a sports bra, a tank top, and then a sweatshirt. I looked in the mirror to make sure I didn't look too bad. I debated on changing my pants but decided that I'm not going out in public and Brian would be too focused on getting the bedroom done. I stopped at the door and got the requested items, as well as a 12-pack of beer, and headed over. I had only been to their house a couple times since they bought it and was surprised to see just how out of sorts it was. There were paint cans, tools, and boxes all over the place. Considering all they had going on, I wasn't surprised. Brian gave me a tour and kind of explained what they intended to do and when. His father and some relatives and him were all going to be involved and expected it shouldn't take too long. He then showed me the bedroom and I was blown away. The room was messy with things scattered everywhere and a few spots needed to be painted, but all the furniture and light fixtures were in there and covered with sheets. He had anticipated having it all ready that day, in time before Cassie came home. I had asked him what he'd like me to do and he said I can start cleaning up some of the garbage and scraps that were laying around. He was going to be finishing up the closet while I did that, and he turned his Bluetooth on and we got to work. I started mindlessly cleaning up, coming in and out of the room, clearing it out. Doing all this moving had me getting warm, so I decided to take my hoodie off. I placed it in the other room and got back to work. At one point I had been bending over to pick up some screws that were against the baseboards. I glanced behind me for a moment and saw Brian looking in my direction, evidently checking me as I was bent over. He quickly looked away and I tried to act like I didn't notice. I was mentally kicking myself for deciding to wear these leggings. I had a moment of guilt where I thought about how Cassie would feel if she knew her, now husband, was alone in their bedroom with me checking out me. I quickly reasoned with myself that it was harmless. He checked out me, so what? It's not like it was the first time. As I continued to clean up, I kept thinking about it. Not only that, but I kind of liked it. I knew I should have gotten myself off before I came over. The next couple of hours went by quickly. When Brian had finished the closet, he then started to finish up the one wall. I had nearly cleaned everything up and I offered to finish up the other wall. It was getting exciting to know that we would be done soon. I wasn't a skilled painter by any means, but I had painted enough where I could do it correctly. At least this portion of it. I had finished up first and watched Brian finish the last of his side. We both looked around the room trying to notice anything that might have been unfinished. He then proclaimed, "I think that covers it." We did it, and put his hand up for a high five. I walked over to him and he towered over me looking down. Because of the height difference, I had to stand on my tippy toes just to reach his hand. I lost my balance for a second and fell forward into Brian, my chest bumping against his midsection. It was only for a second, but I felt that he must have had some nice abs. We both laughed and he continued to look down. I got the feeling he was looking down my tank top and there was an awkward moment of silence. He then said, "Okay, well, I want these walls to finish drying, but I think it would be safe if we start removing some of the sheets from the furniture. We can move them in place while the walls are drying." I nodded and we started to put things in place where we could. It appeared the walls needed a little more drying, so Brian said, "I don't know about you, but I'm starving. Why don't I go pick up a pizza and we can have a couple of beers while this dries and then we can finish up? If you have somewhere to be, I totally understand. You've been extremely helpful." I insisted that I had nothing planned and some pizza sounded great. I wanted to see this room completed. Brian called for the pizza and got us both a beer while he waited a bit for it to be ready. We made small talk about the wedding and their upcoming trip to Hawaii. He started to pry a little bit about my dating life and I simply told him, "I like being single. I'm not ready for a commitment yet, I guess." He surprised me by saying, "But come on, a girl like you must have certain needs." I let out an exaggerated gasp as Brian has never spoken like that to me or in front of me. "My needs are taken care of, thank you very much." He laughed and said, "Well, I'm glad to hear that." Again, it was awkward silence as we both looked away from each other. "Well, I think I should get the pizza now. If you don't mind, can you take one last look around the floor? That way we can get these sheets off of it and not have to worry about anything getting on the new carpet." He said the pizza place was about 8 minutes away and he would be back soon. When he left, I felt kind of strange being in this house all alone. I started to think about the interaction between Brian and me, about how I had caught him checking me out, how he glanced at me a little longer than needed, about him telling me about my needs. It was turning me on. I continued to think about this as I started to look for stuff on the floor. My mind wandered thinking about his abs and how tall he was. His hands were quite large. I was thinking about Brian's and getting excited. I thought, stop thinking about that, it's wrong, and blamed it on me not getting myself off earlier again. Satisfied the floor was clean of all garbage, I sat on the bed and started thinking. Brian had left about 8 minutes ago. That means he'd be at least another 8 minutes. Probably 2 minutes to go in and get the pizza and pay. That seemed like a good amount of time to get myself off. I looked over and saw the paintbrush he was using laying on top of the can covered with a glove. I never used a paintbrush like this before. I had used a multitude of household objects during my life, but a paintbrush handle would be a first. A quick calculation told me I still have 7 minutes left. That's cutting it close. I'd have to act now. I got up and grabbed the paintbrush carefully. I thought about Brian using this brush earlier, thinking he'd have to at some point grab it again. I then heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. I pulled my shirt down and quickly put the brush and can back where I grabbed it from. I grabbed the paintbrush and wiped it against the floor, making sure that it was dry. I heard the front door open and knew it was unlikely that he'd ever notice, as the room itself smelled strongly of fresh paint. I tried to calm myself, and it then occurred to me that there was a problem, and this tank top I had on didn't do a good job of covering that. The hoodie I had removed earlier was in their spare bedroom. I wouldn't be able to grab it in time. Not to mention that house itself was quite warm, so the hoodie would have seemed odd. I started to walk to the kitchen where Brian was getting out paper plates and beers. On top of that, I was now excited as ever, failing again to get myself off. I hoped that eating the pizza would distract me enough to snap out of it. Before I got into the kitchen, Brian walked toward me with a beer and handed it to me while taking a sip from his. He wanted to check out the walls before we ate. He took a look and noticed one spot he wanted to touch up. I saw him reach down and grab his paintbrush. The same paintbrush that I used only a few minutes ago. He removed the lid from the paint can and finished up the one spot. He hadn't really looked at me closely at this point, but when he put the can and brush down, he looked at me and couldn't help but notice my chest. When he looked away and suggested we eat, I tried to adjust myself quickly. I knew I couldn't do anything about my chest, but I found myself not caring as much. If he was going to look, he was going to look. We headed into the kitchen and sat on the chairs amongst the clutter. I was hungry and managed to eat a piece and a half while nursing my beer. Brian, on the other hand, ate like a fiend. He must have had 4 pieces while putting away 2 beers. As I was sitting, I did try to position my arms over my chest. I found myself checking Brian out. He was wearing a t-shirt and an old pair of jeans. At the same time, it felt like he was checking me out too, all while he kept the conversation innocent and about the house, Cassie, and their honeymoon. When we finished eating, Brian got up and grabbed another couple beers. When he went to offer me one, I declined. I didn't mind a beer or two, but I was more of a wine girl. Brian must have remembered, because he said, "Ah, that right, you like your vino. Well, let me crack open a bottle for you. I have plenty in the basement. You certainly earned a glass, and I can't drink alone." While laughing, I tried to decline as it was going on 8 p.m. and I had wanted nothing more than to get home, but he cut me off, insisting that I have a glass. Before I could say any more, he was on his way to get the bottle. Make sure to like this video if you want the next part of the story.